All right, everyone, here we are, taking flight, landing customers. Thank you guys so much for coming to this panel. Juna, I let you on thinking maybe you were Daniel, so I'm gonna push you off for a moment. We're still trying to get Daniel Cano, our other moderator, up onto the stage with us, but in the meantime, we're gonna keep going and hopefully he'll be able to join us. So this is our day focused on business, our panel focused on the business, which I know there's a lot of people in the audience that are maybe starting their own businesses or curious about this space. So we're really lucky to have these panelists with us. I am Siobhan Montoya Lavender, and I'm the co-founder of Thanks a Ton, which is an early stage startup for gifting carbon dioxide removal. I also have with me today Antti Vihavainen, who is the co-founder of Puro.Earth, which is a leading marketplace in engineered carbon removal technologies. And he is working on a number of different projects and has been for a while. He will self-admit that he's a little early with some of his ideas, but the good thing is that he never shows up too late, so that's important. We're also really lucky to have Madison Savilow, who is the chief of staff really for carbon upcycling technologies, and she kind of wears two hats because she's also working for another part of carbon upcycling technologies, which is their really remarkable consumer brand, which is Expedition Air. So she'll kind of talk to us about the two sides of carbon upcycling technologies. And then we also have Daniel Cano, which hopefully when he's able to connect, we'll pull him up. Here we go. Perfect timing, Daniel, as always. I'm bringing him up onto the stage. So to follow up with introductions, we have Daniel Cano, who is the founder and CEO at Carbon Power Mexico, which is a really exciting carbon capture and utilization company based out of Mexico City. And so just to give you some idea of the structure for today, so we're going to do 30 minutes of a regular panel discussion, and then we're going to do 30 minutes where it's going to be interactive live questions. So at that point, I will invite people from the audience to raise their hand by clicking the Ask to Share audio and video button, and then I will pull you from the audience onto the live stage so that you can join the discussion. If anybody is familiar with Clubhouse, it's a very similar structure to Clubhouse there. So we'll do that at the 30-minute mark once we get the panel up and running here. So thank you so much to our panelists for being here today. We are really excited to be talking about business. I think it was really cool to hear Marcus outline the whole idea of carbon removal 2.0 and how the area is just really expanding rapidly. And so you three are all kind of veterans, honestly, in the industry. Even if you've only been in it for a few years, there's so much motion happening so quickly. So one question that I think I want to ask Antti about in particular is because you founded Puro.Earth in 2018. And so you've been around for a while and seeing this progress. And really, in the last 12 months, we've seen so much momentum. So I would be curious, at Puro.Earth, what's something in the last 12 months of your business model that you've really had to change because there's so much more interest and awareness around carbon removal?
Yeah, thanks. Good question, indeed. The business model has been a continuous series of iterations. We've built this business, the way lean startup principles teach us. So we'll create a hypothesis and we'll try to figure out how to test it. And based on the test, we'll just either accept that this is a good way to handle this particular thing and or otherwise we just need to change it. So we've had to maintain our flexibility all along the way, and now that we've seen, like Marcus said in the beginning, much more demand than supply, we've had to sort of expand our offer beyond just trading in the spot market and try to sort of assist the suppliers to expand their capacity in a massive way so that they can do pre-commitments for the sales of sequestration that will happen in the future. It's good to know that these are not ex ante certificates or anything. It's just that something that will happen in the future, will be certified as ex post, and then they can be traded with. But these pre-commitments are definitely becoming more and more important. And another thing perhaps that has been a bit of a surprise for us, even though there's a lot of activity all around the world, we've been surprised by the activity in the US. So that's been a positive surprise again as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm really excited as an American who does not live in the United States that we have a panelist from Europe, from Canada, from Latin America. So it's really cool to get the business perspective that's not just the US lens. So to both Madison and Daniel, I'd be curious, what's something that has surprised you looking from the outside about the US and its approach to carbon dioxide removal? Madison, you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, it's really great to see how quickly the US moves on a lot of these initiatives. I think in Canada in particular, we love the idea of different carbon removal solutions, but we're pretty risk averse compared to what the US is like, or even what Europe is like. So I think from the standpoint of only looking from a US lens, it's really promising to see that there's so much uptake of these technologies.
Yeah, great. And Daniel, what do you think is kind of surprising about the US and the US's approach to carbon dioxide removal?
It's a great sign that we are going towards a better world, actually. And I believe that it's going to give a lot of more confidence to governments and more to investors to be willing to pay more to try and demonstrate that these technologies are able to have an impact that is measurable and it can have traction. So this is something that's going to connect with people. So I believe that it's really important right now that this way that has been taken, right?
Yeah, oh, good points. Madison, in working with Expedition Air, and you're doing, trying to find customers for these really cool products that are based from captured carbon. And I'm curious, how has the recent influx of interest in carbon removal made you have to engage differently with customers? How are you changing your engagement strategy based on the moment we are right now in carbon removal?
Well, the reason we actually started this brand was to raise awareness of the industry. I think there's still a lot of misconception or misunderstandings about what we're trying to accomplish and what these materials are and how they work. So that was a lot of the reason we started it. And we started creating consumer products about 2 years ago now is when we started developing these just kind of novel marketing type products. Because we've had such an influx of people asking for them and wanting smaller consumer-sized portions of material for them to explore use in their own consumer products and in their art, we've actually expanded that out and started to embrace it a lot more than we thought we would. So yeah, I think that's a bit of a change actually, is that the more this becomes popular and the more there's awareness of it, the more interest we get in the direct material, as well as more understanding of what these products are trying to achieve, especially not being made 100% from CO2. We use a sequestration process rather than a conversion process. So yeah, it's just interesting to see the awareness growing in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Antti, has there been any way that you're engaging differently with customers now this year than perhaps you were in 2019 or 2020?
Well, yes, certainly. It's remarkable nowadays. We don't have to start by explaining what difference there is with carbon, emission reductions and emission removals. That let's say general awareness has grown tremendously, and that saves a lot of time from me and my colleagues who are engaging with these customers. Although we also must admit that we engage with companies who come to us and say that, okay, our bosses have now made a pledge that we will be carbon net zero at some point of time in the future, and we need to figure out how to manage that. So these are sort of course, interesting starting points for a discussion. But then again, they typically have in those cases they have a strong commitment from their top leadership, and they have a budget, and they can start working out a roadmap for themselves. So that's definitely leading to very concrete discussions as well. Yeah, so just general awareness of the concept has changed a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And Daniel, tell us about what you're seeing in Latin America and in Mexico in specific about the awareness of carbon removal. And are you having the kind of similar problem that Antti was talking about, where there's sometimes more demand than supply?
So, I've been in touch with a few companies from several industries,
such as the cosmetic industry, and they're really interested in buying all the ethanol that I can be able to produce from carbon dioxide. And in other two kinds of approaches, and we have the clients who are looking for carbon negative raw materials, and the ones who are looking to reduce their emissions, such as the concrete industry. And I've been in touch with several of them here in Mexico. They're all over the world. They don't just operate here in Mexico, and they are actually investing in carbon removal solutions. And there's this one, Cemex, is already working with Opus 12, I believe that this name of these guys, who are developing catalysts for different substances that can obtain from carbon dioxide. And they have already invested in these guys. And so there's investment in carbon removal, but it's not quite
how much they should be
paying right now. But I'm actually with Siemens, at least talking about this. They have
this kind of solutions, not just
the one that I'm developing, but different one of them. And even the concrete industry, they're looking for carbon negative concrete. And that's impressive, because even you would think that Latin America would take back, but it's not. It's a really important issue, even if it haven't occurred this situation as the U.S. positioning itself as a leader in this kind of looking for investment into this kind of technology. So yeah, I would say that's kind of important. What happens?
Yeah, it's exciting that this is not something that's just happening in the US, that's just happening in Europe. We see interest in carbon dioxide removal all over the globe, which is of course really necessary, as it is a global problem, and there is carbon dioxide all over the globe. So that's really exciting to hear that there's interest and momentum in Latin America as well. So Antti, you mentioned that people are much more knowledgeable now, but I'm curious, and anybody can just grab this question, but what is a common misconception that you hear a lot? And then as a business practitioner, how do you address those common misconceptions with clients or with future potential clients? Anybody?
Well, if I may just start there, one thing that I'm a simple person. I want to be able to focus on just one thing at a time, and in my opinion, considering the situation is so critical, and the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere keeps on growing, I think people would be it would be easier for them to achieve their climate goals if they were optimizing just the climate effect and not a million different other topics with it. Of course, there needs to be a strict sort of a do no harm type of an approach for all the other aspects of the operations. There should not be any social or any other sort of harmful things happening. But then again, I would say that if you're sort of trying to figure out how to make a climate impact, then use that as the main criterion, and not just all these other aspects that might be there. so that's perhaps one thing, and another thing is sometimes we meet with people who have one sort of concept in their heads, and they're saying that okay, afforestation or direct air capture or something is the silver bullet, and I think we are so early in this journey. If we are in 2.0, I'm waiting to see the 8.0, so that we know what eventually will be the massive selection of technologies that we need to be able to deploy. So I would say that there's a need for portfolios, there's a need for long-term commitments and building the capacity, and not trying to figure out what would be my silver bullet. There's plenty of silver bullets.
That's really well put, and I think that really falls in line with the AirMiner ethos of an all of the above approach to carbon dioxide removal. So recognizing that there are multiple solutions and we're so early and we don't necessarily know which one's going to take off the most, and that we really need a holistic approach. So Madison, what's something that you get as like a common misconception about the work at Carbon Upcycling Technologies, and then how do you communicate that to customers?
Yeah, I think the one that Antti mentioned is spot on. I think that's something that we get quite a bit, is that in this space, if you have a carbon utilization tech or a carbon capture tech, and marketing that out just as any normal business would, it almost takes this appearance that you're acting as a silver bullet, when in a lot of cases you're really open to collaboration, and there's a lot of business partnerships that you've built up to make that a success. So I think that's just something to be more wary of as people try to kind of attack the space, I guess, and deny the value that's there. I think the misconception that we get quite a bit, especially being based in Alberta, which is very oil and gas centered, is that we're an enabler for big emitters. So that's one of the ones that I think going forward we need to be careful of, especially from a capture standpoint from point source emissions, that we're making sure we're doing it in a progressive way and trying to achieve the climate goals while we're transitioning to a cleaner energy economy. So yeah, that's one of the ones we get a bit, I guess. And I think the way we tackle that is just showcasing that this is something that's necessary for us to reach our climate goals as we're transitioning and as these technologies are developing, and the deployment of them aren't necessarily at the scale we need yet. So we need something in the midterm to bridge that gap.
Yeah, great points. Okay, so I know there's probably a lot of people in the audience that are interested in starting their own businesses, or have just started, or are thinking about starting. As Tito mentioned, the amount of people in AirMiners has really grown extremely just in the last 5 months, and so there's a lot of people that want to get started. So I'm curious, if you were starting, this is a question for everybody, we're going to go through everybody. If you were starting your business today, Puro.Earth today, Carbon Upcycling Technologies today, what is the piece of advice that you would give yourself that you wish you'd known before? Antti, you want to start?
Well, I was thinking about this in advance, and I must say that starting a startup is a challenging venture, of course, and we chose to partner with a corporation that would help us, get off the ground and get funding, regularly and get coaching inside, and that was actually pretty good. So working with corporations right from the beginning is definitely not at all bad, and that's actually something that I would give as an advice to others, that that's a direction that you might want to look at. That may sort of make it sometimes a little easier. Of course, sometimes it makes life a little quite difficult as well. But I think if you have a chance, why don't you check it out as well?
Yeah, partnering, that's a smart idea. And Daniel, what would you say to yourself if you were starting Carbon Power Mexico today?
I think that right way together, like they're like so,
So I would say that there's like two different ways.
Like one already is like and they getting a investment is like all their culture, and one is like you can
Cutting out a little bit. Oh. Yeah, maybe try going off screen and just doing audio. Maybe that will, maybe if you just go off screen and do audio, just audio, and that'll, maybe we can hear you better without freezing.
Okay. Is it better?
Yes, go ahead. So advice to yourself if you were starting Carbon Power Mexico today.
Best. Great developer.
Still losing on you.
Getting in touch with corporations.
I believe that it's just
Like just get into this the main sources of the solution. Try to plan them, make a business.
Yeah, I think that good advice is to get going. You know, I think a lot of us that were maybe interested in carbon for a while, but we kind of just hang around the edges. And one of the great things about the boot up, about the launch pad, about all these AirMiners activities is it kind of gets you right in the thick of things. So that's really exciting. And then Madison, if you were starting today, what would you say? What would you say to yourself?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. I would say just jump in. I think one of the things I've noticed with a couple of companies is that they're waiting until things are absolutely perfect for them to launch their business or their product or things like that. And I think there's a lot to say for just having a minimum viable product for something that you can launch out, show people, and get started. I think what happens then once you have something even just small, or it could be something you're going to be super embarrassed of in a year's time because it's not ready, but that really helps you get discussions going about partnerships and really get the ball rolling on scaling that. So yeah, that's something that we definitely did with Expedition Air. Like it wasn't even ready. We had I know there was like a contact form that wasn't connected to anything for like 2-3 weeks because I didn't know that was that was possible. Like just jump in and just start things. I think that's the way to go. The other thing I would say too, just generally to this space, is that you don't necessarily have to come from a STEM background to be a part of this. I think that's one of the coolest things that I've found is that myself not having any science background, jumping into this, explaining nanotech on a daily basis for what our technology is, it's really cool to see that this space is so eclectic and it needs everyone involved. It's not just scientists. So that's what I would say generally to just this whole ecosystem, is that there's a role for everyone here.
That's great.
If I may jump, just
please.
to add to that, I think being a business guy, always interested in natural sciences. I think it's useful definitely to have the understanding, what happens in there. I think this whole term carbon mathematics is useful. I think we all should be very knowledgeable in that. We should. And I think, for example, Carbon Plan, if you just Google that, think tank or whatever it is, they publish a lot of very high quality stuff related to that. I would suggest reading that material, digesting it, and sharing and discussing with other folks. I think that's really useful.
Yeah. Okay, so just pivoting a little bit here. We're talking about air mining and carbon removal taking flight, but are there course corrections that we need to do? I know, Tito talks a lot about getting it right in this moment because we're taking off and we don't want to accidentally take off in the wrong direction. So question open to anybody, are there some course corrections that we need to make now as we're taking flight with carbon dioxide removal?
Yeah, I think, you want to go ahead, Antti, first?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would say from my standpoint, a lot of what we're seeing in this industry, I think there needs to be more transparency about the impacts people are making. I think that's one of the big ones that we're noticing, is being a small industry that's starting to take off, as you mentioned. we really need to protect the industry from players that are greenwashing. And I think that's something that Marcus mentioned as well. That's something that can be really easily hidden with really great marketing. So that's one of the ones I would say right off the top.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Auntie?
Yeah, fight greenwashing, definitely. And the best way to fight it is to have very strict criteria. When we should not mix avoided emissions and sequestered emissions. We should always have the most conservative approach to quantification and accurate approach to quantification. We've always tried to find the least disputable ways of sequestering carbon dioxide, and that has helped us to gain some ground over here. And I think it's definitely a valid, it's a point that might destroy everything. If we, collectively get accused of, helping greenwashing and helping, continued use of fossil fuels without any sort of reduction in emissions in the first place, that's scary.
Yeah, and just we do need technologies of all types of sizes, whether you're sequestering only a small amount, you see that scaling in the future, or whether you're already at that larger scale. We do need technologies of different size, but it's the fact that you need to be transparent and accurate with your quantification. The key. Like I said before, there's a lot of space for everyone to join into this fight in this industry. There's different size applications of the tech. Exactly, really on it with the quantity, being conservative with your numbers.
Yeah.
I totally agree with this. And this is why I believe that
we can also get to a blockchain alignment to this, like the quantification and emission based on a blockchain technology. That you could be measuring that in a standardized way. That I believe that is going to avoid us a lot of problems. If we start to implement this, like measurement, lining evenly of the emissions we are. I know an amazing way the
Yeah, course corrections. People are jumping in the chat and asking for other course corrections. We all want to make sure we're on the right course here. Madison?
Yeah, sorry, I just kind of jumped in there. I think another one though too is we have a lot of long-term goals, and I think for governments to set shorter-term roadmaps for how we're going to achieve these would be really beneficial. That's something that I think we're seeing is almost like an abstract number of companies cutting their emissions in long-term goals by 2050 or things like that. But what are you doing in the first year and in the first 2 years, and what are the metrics you have to hit from a short-term perspective?
Absolutely. All really good points, you guys. So one question I want to ask before we switch to the open panel where we're going to pull people onto the stage to join the discussion. I wanted to ask you guys, lightning round, if you weren't doing what you're doing right now, what sector of CDR, of carbon dioxide removal, would you want to work in, and where would you like to be spending your time? Madison?
I'm not sure if it exactly falls in CDR. I guess it could, depending on how you're doing it, but I would say hydrogen.
Hydrogen. Okay, she'd want to work in hydrogen. And Daniel, where would you want to work if you were not working for Carbon Power Mexico?
Perhaps, I don't know, like I really like to develop because my
Yeah, and Auntie, where would you be working if you weren't working at Puro.Earth?
Strangely enough, I think I would be fascinated in finding a biomass waste stream that is massive and that can be turned into a carbon storage. Stabilize it first into something that doesn't escape back into the atmosphere, doesn't decompose. Maybe biochar could be the answer, maybe some other ways of doing it, and then storing it in a useful way.
Yeah, cool. All right, you guys. Well, we're at the half-hour mark. And so now I'm going to invite everybody who's listening. If you would like to ask a question live on camera, beware if you're in your PJs, you will be on camera. go ahead and you can raise your hand by clicking the Ask to Share Audio and Video button up there in the corner. And similarly to Clubhouse, we can kind of pull you on stage to ask a follow-up question to one of our panelists. And you're also welcome to throw some questions, continue to put questions in the chat, and if we have time, we'll get to some of those. I'm going to bring my former boss, Ardea, up to the stage now to ask a question. Welcome, Ardea. Good to see you. This is Ardea Denies of Polyma Carbon Negative Furniture with us.
That is true. Thank you so much. Great panel, you guys. I was wondering, how do I pronounce your name? Is it Auntie?
Auntie, yes.
Auntie, okay. Auntie, what kind of waste streams do you see being utilized, either utilized well, or what kind of waste streams do you feel like there's just so much waste and we're not using it?
Well, I think there are these rather unsexy waste streams, like the sludge that comes from water treatment, which probably should be utilized in one way or the other. There's huge waste streams coming from the paper and pulp industry. There's, of course, as we all know, sugar cane production taking place in Latin America, where I think we could add a lot of value to by sequestering that and not just letting it escape back into the atmosphere. So there's plenty massive scale waste streams.
One that I would mention too, one of the things we do at Carbon Upcycling is we sequester CO2 into fly ash. And fly ash is actually a byproduct of coal incineration plants, but a lot of it just sits in landfills. And it's actually the #1 solid waste product on Earth. Some of it even dates back to the 1910s, and it's literally just sitting there. So we're upcycling that, taking it out of landfill and sequestering CO2 into it, then putting it into concrete. So it's going to be basically a carbon sink for the rest of that duration of that building. So there's tons of solid waste materials out there.
Yeah, and by the way, anyone else who wants to jump into this panel discussion, we have more seats available. So just go ahead and ask to share your audio. But I think that's really cool to be discussing, like, what are our waste streams and how can we better utilize them, because there's just so much waste that's happening right now, and there's lots of opportunities and lots of businesses like Ardea's that are trying to become more of a circular economy. In fact, I think Madison, Ardea, and Daniel are all doing kind of circular economy business models where you're trying to reuse the waste products of CO2. So that's very cool. So we have, let me see, I'm gonna read through for some other questions here. And then again, anybody is welcome to raise a hand, or do you have another question?
Follow-up, sure, why not?
Go ahead.
So when we're talking about waste, and I talk about like paper pulp, which, like, the idea of cutting down trees to make paper, like, I hate it. We talk about that. We talk about fly ash, which, like, coming from Kentucky, my alarm bells go off, like, coal mining, oh no. So, like, as far as business and marketing goes, how can you, like, how have you successfully done or seen companies kind of like calm down the nervous system when you're like, we're partnering with the paper industry or the coal companies? Because, like, for a lot of people, it's like, nope, I want to be as far away as possible from that, but we want them to support this anyway.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that's something we deal with a lot. Like, our use case for fly ash, for instance, like, that's something that's tied to coal, not directly, it's a waste material. So, I mean, we're helping out in that sense, but we're also putting that product into concrete, which is obviously a large emitter if you're using cement. But one of the things that we're doing is reducing the greenhouse gas footprint of a lot of these materials. So for concrete, for instance, we can reduce the footprint by up to 25% through the use of, or through the reduction of cement, as well as the CO2 actually sequestered into that process. So I think that's what we try to spin, is that for us to actually achieve the climate goals that we've set for ourselves, we can't be having these massive overhauls of supply chains so quickly. We need to work with what we have. And if we can reduce the footprints of the materials that are being used and will be used for at least the next 5, 10, 15 years, that's something that's going to be a lot more applicable to us reaching our goals than really this large overhaul.
Cool. And Jack, welcome to the conversation. Jack Sullivan, do you have a question for one of our panelists?
Thank you. I wanted to just kind of pose it broadly. I'm very interested in some of the work that Upcycling Technologies is doing in solid carbon, and going to Madison's point just now about utilizing some of the existing industries that are out there. Concrete's really taking off, as is pretty obvious by now, but I'm anxious to hear more discussion about some of the other possibilities in solid carbon. And I'd love to hear what everybody has to say about that. Other industries that maybe have the opportunity, carbon composites, carbonates, mineralization, even it can be a natural process, just generally the solid carbon sequestration market, because solid carbon is, there's less volume in solid carbon than there is in gaseous form. And it allows us to move a little quicker if we're trying to sequester rapidly. So I'll jump off. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Jack, for jumping in. One question for Madison was, are you eventually planning on doing like a spin-off are you eventually planning to make the two organizations separate, or are you going to keep them together? What's the plan? What's the plan there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We originally had consumer products directly on our carbon upcycling website, but like I mentioned, we're also selling concrete and plastics and a bunch of other industrial processes. So it really just looked like a bit of a mess on our site to have that. So that's why we spun this off as kind of a separate brand. And eventually, if things go well, it hopefully will become something that can stand on its own two legs. And we have some really great new discussions with larger brands to integrate the material into their supply chains, which will be a part of what we want to do as like a decarbonization strategy consultancy within Expedition Air. So there's a lot of plans going forward with this, but yes, hopefully one day if things go well.
Cool. And welcome, Luke. Welcome to the conversation. Did you have a question you wanted to ask one of our panelists here? Oh, you're on mute, Luke.
Today, people on phones were having a lot of trouble unmuting.
Perhaps we're having. So Luke, we're going to come back to you if you're able to unmute. Salvador, did you have a question for our panelists?
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I am very much in the space right now of promoting ocean CDR, and I feel like I'm in the same fight that Anti is in with Puro.Earth in terms of I'm beginning to write a playbook for my public company outreach or my government outreach. So I'm really curious, Antti, how you got started. Puro.Earth, I know that you said that you've had to be flexible and you've had to be changing. I'm about to get started with calling public companies about our technology that, really there's the science, but it still requires verification. I'm trying to get more companies to be more like Shopify, Microsoft, Stripe, for example, want to take a risk with ours, and not pay for all the CO2 removal, but like in milestones. So I'm just curious, how your experience has been with approaching large public companies about your marketplace for solving that. And thank you.
Yeah. So it never occurred to us that we would be a Finnish company. It never occurred to us that we would be a European company. We were sort of immediately trying to reach out to the global players who were sort of at least showing some signs in their way they communicated about climate and ESG or sustainability things. So we reached out to them. We wanted to speak their language so that they would understand that we are trying to help them, and we were never afraid of them. Let's put it this way, and that's why I guess we were able to get. And of course, at the same time, the product itself is rather sort of solid. It's fully science-based, and therefore it's easy to justify why we are reaching out to them. So I would encourage that, but it might help for you and others that are planning on something like that. Marcus used a plug, a shameless plug in the beginning. I would also encourage you and everybody to reach out to Puro.Earth, and just see if we can help you out. Let's see if we can establish a methodology around what you are doing and start promoting it jointly.
Great. Luke, thank you for jumping back in. Are you able to have some audio?
Yes, I think so. Hear me? Yeah, I was on
Yeah,
the
we can hear you.
iPad, so I don't think it worked. Yeah, just about the carbon credits. I don't know, is there a hierarchy when it comes to permanent sequestration versus temporary things such as planting trees, or versus permanent things such as turning olivine into limestone? I don't know if there's a difference in every ton you put into the earth permanently versus something that will be re-released in 50 years when you when you approach customers.
So from what I can say, we've got both less permanent and more permanent methods for sequestering carbon dioxide. There is, it seems to be the primary determinant. So that the more permanent the sequestration is, the more likely it is that it can command a higher price
Right.
for that. So yes.
And in terms from the credit side, but it's all seen as equal, is it? When you provide the certificates.
Well, I think there is a perception that that they are not equal. That there is a difference between the permits.
But I mean, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And welcome, Philip. Did you have a question for the panelists?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. So I'm currently in the process of building a company which is going straight into this direction, handling somehow the climate change. Currently, we are focusing more on web development, but we have also plans for creating specific platform products. And my question is, what would be your advice for us in terms of a process? How should we approach getting out there and getting financing?
Anybody? It was a great question. Actually, someone else in the chat asked how you found your first customer. So that's kind of a simple, how are you getting the financing? Then how are you finding your customers?
You want to take that, Madison?
Yeah, I don't know if we're the best to answer this. We've been primarily grant funded to date, and we're first raised. So on the finance side, if you do have an option to take advantage of grants in your either regional area or at a federal level, I highly recommend it. They also give you some really great support network-wise, and that's been pretty exciting. In terms of finding your first customers, it's a lot of, in this space, I think it's a lot of proving your worth and doing a lot of LCAs and making sure you're actually making the impact that you are. I think that's something that's really important in this. The other thing too that we found is that you have to have an economic value to your business model. Like, I think there's a few companies that I've noticed have really, really great impact, but it's hard to actually put a business case behind it. And then it's really hard to onboard partners from a commercial standpoint to back you in that. So that's something I would mention as well, to really make sure you have a solid business model when you're going into those types of pitches. And that's the first thing these companies are going to look at is their bottom line, unfortunately. Now with a lot of the way that policy is leaning towards carbon pricing and things like that, it becomes a little bit easier for you to take advantage of that portion as well. But that's what I would suggest.
Okay, and in terms of carbon costs, for example, how do you model this stuff? I mean, what predictions are you doing?
For carbon credits, you said?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the business model depends highly on future decisions, right? I mean, that's what we have experienced in playing around with the numbers. It depends highly on political decisions and stuff like that, where or how efficient your business model could be. It really depends heavily on those questions and on the time frame, of course.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think from a financial standpoint, there was a piece of advice given to our company, probably about a year and a half ago when we were creating a lot of our financial models that would be used to get new partners and new customers. And one of the things that they suggested is to make your business model as middle of the line as possible. Like, don't go too conservative, don't go too aggressive on your estimates. One of the reasons for that is that everyone perceives those levels of risk differently. If you're too conservative, you lose the chance, or you potentially have the chance of losing that customer. And if you're too aggressive, you might be promising too much. So that's what I would say in terms of, evaluating that. It does all come down to future decisions and what policy might change your economic value of your company. But just take your kind of the best middle stance that you can when you're putting those proposals together. And that's what I would say in estimating what the value of those credits could be. If you can't afford, say, a life cycle assessment right now, there are protocol options and stuff like that for some voluntary registries that you can get into as well.
A tangent, not necessarily helpful for Philip, but if you want to start a business in this area and don't mind running a consultancy, LCAs, that's a sure way to make the get first customers. There's apparently too little supply of people who can, or competence in this area. So life cycle assessments. That's definitely a good.
Yeah, we actually have another question right before we get to Fabian. We have a question in the chat too, that would you guys recommend defining your LCA, life cycle analysis, as cradle to grave or cradle to gate or something else? How would you approach the life cycle analysis?
I think it really depends on what you're doing. Like, if you're a material company, our work is primarily in additives, so we can track our additive to a certain point of when it enters, say, a construction site or something like that, and that's really where our LCA would kind of stop at that point. That being said, as long as you've done an LCA or kind of your best estimate of what you can afford for an LCA, because to Anti's point, LCA consultancies, there's a lot of money in that. They're very expensive for startups to go through that process, albeit very, very important. So I would say, go as far as you possibly can with that, and just define that when you're explaining that to potential customers and to investors.
Which kind of comes back to your whole point about transparency and just making sure we're being really clear and transparent in the industry. Fabian, welcome. Did you have a question for our panel? Still on mute?
Oh no.
It's the life of, we'll come back to you. It's the life of virtual conferences, is the mute. So other questions we are getting from, we lost Fabian, okay. So
there was one question from the chat, if I may. Leo Schwartz had he can't get it, he's having some issues. So he wanted to ask about greenwashing. The sentiment seems to be that carbon capture should not help fossil fuels industry, but shouldn't the focus be on decarbonization rather than defossilization? I think Fabian plus one, that was a great question. I don't know if Fabian, if that's the question you wanted to ask.
No, that's my good friend Leo, his question, so I'm not going to take credit for that one. But yeah, no, I was just echoing it in the chat.
Thoughts to that question?
I've got a separate question if that's what you're wondering. But Leo's is also a great question.
Yeah, I guess I can start on that one. Yeah, it's kind of it's a difficult conversation. Like, those are getting really into the nuanced conversations of what this sector represents and how we're actually tackling reducing emissions. And I think to that point, I think it's decarbonization of the fossil fuel industry is essentially what carbon capture from point source emissions does. And that's one step in bridging the gap between the technologies that we currently have and what we can achieve with the energy alternatives other than fossil fuel based energy sources or fuel to what we're going. Yeah, it's just such a I don't exactly know how to answer that succinctly and in a well-mannered way, I guess.
But I would sort of say that I don't think that we can afford to disregard or just leave out or just somehow turn our backs to companies that are causing emissions. If they are motivated to invest in decarbonization, also on the carbon removal, carbon net negative side, of course, utilization as well. I think we should take advantage of that and turn those companies into something better.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of pressure on them right now, or increasingly more pressure on fossil fuel companies to actually make distinct changes. I know, being based in Alberta, we've been talking to some of the largest oil and gas companies in North America, at least, all wondering how they're going to reduce their emissions, because it's going to become very, very costly for them to be emitters. So I think from a policy standpoint, it's definitely not forgotten. But when we're focusing on, decarbonization from what we can do as a technology standpoint in the CCUS industry, I think that's something we need to focus on is actually really making sure we're making tangible change, we're reducing the emissions they have now, and allowing them that opportunity to use their innovation within these oil and gas companies or these fossil fuel sources to really, hone in on how they're going to transition to alternative fuels and renewable energy.
Luke, welcome back.
Yeah.
Want to dovetail any questions on that?
Yeah, it's just something else was when a company is looking to completely become carbon neutral and offset all of their emissions, do you find, because I've seen it done a few different ways, do you find the best way is to look at, for their industry, say 0.5% of that company's revenue generally covers 100% of their emissions, or do you think every company should be thoroughly analysed to find their whole emissions that you can then offset or remove the carbon from the atmosphere for?
Well, that's a very complicated topic. Of course, we've learned to divide the emissions into scope 1, the direct emissions, scope 2, the energy emissions, and scope 3, everything that happens due to our, or that company's operation. And that scope 3 is definitely a challenge. Of course, have company X and they have 100 different suppliers, but these suppliers also do stuff for other companies, and they need to my sort of scope 3 emissions are somebody else's scope 1 emissions.
Right.
I think we should get to the point where everybody is obliged to reduce their emissions as much as possible. That way, I would not have to worry that much about the scope 3 emissions, and that way the whole situation hopefully would become a slightly more comprehensible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, Fabian, I didn't mean to jump over you there. Fabian, you want to ask our panel a question?
Yeah, no worries. It's a really interesting discussion. Thank you very much. I'm just thinking of potential revenue streams for the industry, and I'm just thinking, if you're a business model which is utilizing the carbon, let's say store it in concrete or whatever, is it then possible, do you think, to then sell offsets as an additional revenue stream, or do you think that that maybe some businesses or governments won't be okay with that? They're like, oh, well, you're already making a profit, or how do you think that would work?
No, it's definitely a big incentive. Like it's not something governments ever stepped in and said, oh, you're already making money off of this. It's part of our economic model, and that's directly in line with a lot of other companies that are utilizing CO2 for their materials. I think it's a great way to do it. There is a bit of actually nuance in that in some cases, us as the CO2 utilization company won't necessarily get the credit, but the company using the concrete might. And that's another point to also make too, is who's actually receiving the credit, who owns it, and where is it being applied?
Great question, yeah.
By the way, just in the Puro framework, we always want to identify the first point of no return in the value chain, and grant or issue the certificate, carbon removal certificate for that particular company, and they can then distribute that money in the value chain that best serves in reducing the bottlenecks.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right before we get to Philip, we have a question from the chat, and it's for Antti, and it's how do you make sure that suppliers are really sequestering what they say they're sequestering? Basically, the classic verification and validation question. Do you want to talk to us about your approach for that?
Well, it's I think very sort of straightforward. We've just right from the beginning we've employed or we've partnered with, for example, DNVGL, which is a 130 years old company, has operations in 100 countries, is capable of looking at the facilities that claim that they are producing negative emissions, and based on the evidence and the site visits, they actually go to the site and check out the processes, and based on that they assess the eligibility and write the report, an audit statement, and based on that we can issue certificates. So it's a very sort of it's not rocket science. The process has existed for a long time. We just adopted that.
Yeah. And then Philip, did you have another question? Or Philippe?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of going in this direction. So we are heavily thinking on this topic around this Web 3.0 and token economics, and how we can utilize this on this topic. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about what will be the benefits of blockchain bringing to this whole topic, and what is the community thinking about it? I mean, it's very controversial discussed because blockchain, or at least the current solutions, are using a lot of energy, and you need to offset quite a lot just by running all the systems. There are new things on the horizon, but it will be kind of energy heavy usage stuff. So just want to get some thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's I think a lot of people that are curious about NFTs and blockchain in the carbon space. So if any of you wants to speak to that.
I don't know if you've seen Nora use one example. Sorry, that's the only thing I was going to say. Go ahead, Antti.
Well, I'm a tech guy. I would have wanted to start developing a cool blockchain platform, but we then realized that the problem is not really there, that we would just make sure that there's immutability in the transactions. The problem has been more on the data that goes into the system. We can do many things with just plain old encryption and centralized databases. That's, I don't think, when those structures are challenged, and everybody's happy for the actual climate impact, that is already taking place, and now we are moving to the technical platform where it's being run. Yes, then definitely we should deploy blockchain for the security and for many other purposes. But I think we're not there yet. We are in the phase where we just need to make sure that what we intend that happens for the climate really happens, and blockchain cannot solve that problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up with the last little final thoughts here as we finish this panel. Thank you guys so much. Danielle, sorry you're having internet issues, but we're glad to have you here. Any kind of final thoughts from the panelists about what you want the audience to know about carbon business and your work?
I guess just a final thought, I'd just echo something I said earlier about people just jumping in and joining into this sector. I think there's a place for everyone, and yeah, the more people, the better. So that's what I would end on.
Yeah, great point. Great point. As someone who's starting a business myself. And Antti, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I don't know. There are plenty of pioneering companies that are helping to make this happen. Hopefully yours can be one of those as well.
There you go. There you go. Call to action, guys. Let's all dig in our heels and try and solve this problem together. Thank you everyone so much. We're going to be ending this panel. You're welcome to stay and hang out. You don't get automatically kicked out, but there will be nobody speaking. You're welcome to stay and chat on the chat. But it's time to go on to the next panels. We've got a great schedule of different activities happening. So if you navigate over to the left and it says panel sessions, just how you got here, you can find the next panels. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate having you all.
Yes, thanks
Enjoy
so much.
the rest of the conference.
Bye.
Thank you.